Let's call this meeting to order of the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority Policy Advisory Committee. And let's begin with the national anthem. I'm sorry, the Pledge of Allegiance. You're not going to hear me sing, God, please. So everybody stand and please follow after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, and with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So we'll take roll. Dave Janis, I'm here. Renee Westalusk. Here. And Renee's out there for a reason, health issues, not hers. Something she might catch. So Renee's here. West? Here. Lyle?
I'm here.
Judy?
Here.
Camille?
Here.
Tim Carroll? Here. And Regina Troglin?
Here.
Don Zadiba?
Here.
Tom McCoskis?
Here.
Overdressed John Kersey?
Present.
And Lorelei Oviatt, she's not online. So we have a quorum, and we have all our current members with Lorelei an exception. With that, we'll go to open public comment, if there is any. So do we have any open public comment from the audience? And do we have any open public comment online? Okay. We're now up to item number 4, approve the minutes of the September PAC meeting, and your fearless chair forgot to bring them or forward them, so we will have to postpone that approval till the next meeting. And that brings us to item number 5, and I need to do a little explaining and ask poll the panel or the PAC about how we want to conduct this together to meet. Lisa Butler is going to be conducting this item on our agenda, and it is both Stantec's facilitation survey out brief combined with the inputs that they had received at the couple of town halls they did, which most everybody on this committee was either at or watching online or has seen it subsequently. And then they took that information, as she and I talked, I said, we'd like to bounce that off what we have put together for the new communications and engagement plan, because we took a lot of that into account, what we heard in our discussions, as well as a number of other, we had 5 major categories of inputs that you saw, that we had both made our recommendations for C&E during this phase, not in the formal plan, and then C&E, the C&E plan itself, which would become a part of the next GSP submittal. So her plan was to engage this a little bit like a workshop and get our feedback on some of it. And we talked about 2 options. One is we remain up here at the dais. I turn the mic over to her, and she gives us the presentation, and she leads the engagement in feedback, 2-way feedback from the members of the PAC, with each of us having a microphone, or given the small audience, the PAC members would step down from the dais out into the audience and participate as audience members through it. And at the end of that, we would have a presentation, and we have a hard copy in front of us, and it's for the public and those online. It's going to be up on the screen here. We'll have the value of the discussions we engage in. We'll have the videotapes of this meeting, and we will then come back. We're not going to have a December PAC meeting. We're going to come back in January and decide, and this is my understanding, and let me know if I've got this wrong, Lisa. From our standpoint, we're going to come back to this and see do we need to go back and modify anything? Were there things that we think need additions, inclusions, oversights, whatever, in the plan or the communications and engagement in general? So we would bring that up at a future meeting, in probably our January meeting, which would be the fourth week in January. And you, Lisa, and the facilitators will take back the inputs you got here, add that to all the data you've had. She's going to give us a link to the survey, and any of us who haven't filled out the survey can also fill out the survey, and then you're going to take that report, that information back, condense it into the report, and give it to the water district.
That's correct.
Okay, so that's the process. So the question, and we don't need a formal vote on it, is do we want to go out into the audience to facilitate that back and forth, or do we want Lisa to brief it here and get our inputs from the dais? And we both agreed that whichever way you guys are more comfortable.
We're here. Let's stay here.
I kind of don't want to move.
There may be an age component in this
Quiet
group.
about that, Mr. Janice.
You got me by a little, so okay.
Okay.
All right, Lisa, well then over to you.
Very good. Thank you so much. So once again, my name is Lisa Butler. Thank you so much for, I appreciate you've changed your schedule to allow me to be here. We want to let you know we have a deliverable back to the Water District in December, so that's one of the reasons that we were managing this timing, to make sure that we had a chance to get some input from all of you that we could incorporate into our conversation we take back to the Water District. As most of you recall, I think we probably have a little bit here, we were asked to come in and assist the area, the region, and talk a little bit about what your options were for collaboration and communications and engagement, and see if we can move forward as a community to get better outcomes. So that was kind of the intention. As a result, these are the things I'm going to cover just quickly. I'll go over what we did and what we learned. I'm going to make that very quick, mostly because I know most of you have followed this quite closely. And so this is a simple recap, just in case somebody's online or wasn't able to hear it the first time. And then I'd like to move into a conversation about, we did have an opportunity to review your communications and engagement plan, give you some feedback about that, and then I'd love to have a conversation with you about the conditions for collaboration. And these are the kinds of things we'll be going back to the Water District and talking to them about as well, and saying, moving forward, these kinds of things need to be present for these processes to work. So that's what we have planned. Are there any questions about what I'm going to cover, or did anyone need me to cover anything else that you don't see on this list?
Well, I have a comment, excuse me, and it's a question also, and I don't know if you're going to address it or not, but when I came to the facilitation meeting that you had in this building, I sat with a group of people, some of whom I know fairly well, but some of whom I have heard from for years, and their opinions or views on the water situation in this valley has not changed a bit. And when I say a bit, I'm talking about the last 40 years. And so we're talking about communications. How do you communicate with people who refuse and deny the science of the situation? It's not an opinion, it's science. And science has told us that we are in critical overdraft. The state has categorized that as high priority. Nature doesn't mess around with people's feelings. Nature works as nature works, and there is an end to a potable water supply from the groundwater in this basin. And I think that is a critical issue as to how we get the word out to these people, their friends, and so on. And so I bring that up right now. I was going to bring it up later, but you asked.
Great, well, thank you. That's, and I think that's an important piece of the conversation, so thank you for raising it. All right, anybody else? Okay. So very quickly, it looks like our slides went a little cattywomp here. So as a quick reminder then, we started in April with the process initiation. We formed a planning committee of some of the stakeholders that helped us think through how we might move forward with a larger community conversation. We conducted a stakeholder assessment and we held public meetings. We had a fairly large reach from June through September. We conducted a scan. This was an internal and external scan. We looked at the conditions for collaboration. We clarified the non-technical risks. Judy was just talking about some of the technical risks, and determined the best engagement techniques for the circumstances, and came up with the idea of doing the interviews and doing the surveys. We were able to talk to 48 individuals and receive survey responses from 137 people. In our workshop, we brought back and we asked the participants, many of you were there, very specifically if we incorrectly understood what we heard, to validate what we were saying, correct us if we were wrong, augment things that we had maybe not heard already or needed some clarification. There was some large general consensus that on the key issues the basin is facing, that we really did get this right, we understood them, and we were able to articulate them. The key themes that came from that process was the need to address communications, transparency, equity issues, the need for best available science and the use of best available science, addressing the needs of small mutuals and other projects and management actions to be returned to the community for discussion. We also heard in the meeting some things we should add to this process is there needed to be additional conversation about mitigating impacts to domestic wells, as well as identifying and addressing the needs of water haulers. So those were some things that we learned from the public meetings. So we took all of that information and laid it side by side with the information in your communications and engagement plan. I will offer, David, I actually had a kind of a fun talk about this. When I had an opportunity to review the plan, I recalled many conversations. I've been involved in the crafting of quite a few communications plans, and I saw that there was an argument between how long a communications plan should be. Should it be short, or should it have more details? So I suggested to Dave that perhaps was a conversation that had occurred with this group, and he assured me that it was. One of the things that we talked a little bit about was because it is a document with thrift, which is, I think, practical in terms of getting somebody to read it, something that length. I'm sure that was part of the deliberations. It also did not have some of the details probably. So there are some balances for that. I'll talk a little bit about some things you can do about that moving forward.
Just one thing. Along those same lines, since you raised the length of it, and yeah, we had discussions on both sides. It wasn't so much when we actually did the drafts, it was what this group wanted to condense it to around three issues. But one of the 5 areas that we reviewed was the 6, we had access to 6 plans from previously approved GSPs. And I've got the names of them if you need them. I went back and looked because my recollection is that 12 pages were still longer than all of them, and that's true.
The ones, were you talking about the ones incorporated within the GSP?
Yeah.
Okay, I can address that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So the ones
So that was the point that was our experience, and DWR had approved those, and so we took the best features out of those that we collectively agreed on.
Yeah, that's a wonderful best practice. One of the things that some of the groundwater basins did, they had separate communications plans that were used just for ongoing discussions and working with groups and those kinds of things. But most of the plans either appended them and only had a couple of smaller paragraphs incorporated into the GSP, or they provided the communication strategy similar to what you did. So in some cases it was an and both, in some cases that's where they landed. We Stantec were involved in the crafting of probably 15 or 20 of them. So we're pretty familiar with that process. Okay. So moving on down, one of the things that we were very interested in, and this was very consistent with the types of things that we found in our own assessment, was that you had maximum public awareness, understanding, and engagement from all the parties, that you found that to be very important. That's clearly one of our findings as well. There was a need for increased credibility and public support for the GSP implementation process, and there was a need to reach full sustainability in achieving the basin goals. We also heard, in terms of concerns and challenges, you talked about the limited and fragmented communications, the use of unfamiliar language and technical terminology. That particular item we heard a lot about, and I think that's an area, definitely I was really pleased to see that you had highlighted that in your plan. Limited access to reference materials, the unfavorable meaning times location. You already know what these things say, so I don't need to read them. But let me just add that this was extremely consistent with the kinds of things that we heard. We also, as a reminder, the way that we conducted the interviews, they were focused on a couple of things. So one of the things that you highlighted that was not in our original report, however, it is something that we would identify doing a social demographic profile of the community. So one of the things that you talked about was limited access for non-English language and hearing impaired individuals, temporary employees and temporary housing, and then absentee landowners. Those are somewhat common in communities of this type. So that when we read that would be consistent with what we would find in the community demographic profile.
Do you have a community demographic?
We did an
profile?
initial one. We didn't include that in the assessment. I think, based on what you did, I think I will include that in my final comments. I think that would be important to do. It definitely informs the plan. It just wasn't something, so when we interviewed people, they gave us their impressions. It just didn't come up in any of those conversations. But
One favor to ask you, since we're going to take this on together with today's discussion in the January timeframe, is it possible to forward that
Yes.
demographics to us so
Yeah,
that we can
yeah.
include it in the package?
yes, we normally, when I look at demographics, I actually had done this before we entered the basin. We did an initial review of the demographics, and you use like the American, the census data and those types of things. It's pretty standard. Those things would show up, though. They definitely would show up in any of those kinds of profiles. So what you've proposed moving forward is about notification and informing of the groundwater through accurate, objective. These are really nicely written, very thoughtful, succinct, easy to understand. We were pretty interested in the designation of a communications director whose responsibility is to implement. And I understand there's quite a bit more detail on that, which wasn't apparent. So that would probably be an area that we would offer some ideas about or some conversations. Also, that would be, in most of the GSAs that we work with, that is something that is typically a delegated activity to one of the GSA members. Typically we'll have especially larger agencies will have public information officers and things like that. So that's a fairly common type of a thing. Also, if you're working with a technical team, oftentimes the technical teams will also have somebody who can manage communications. So those would both be normal. So I didn't know kind of where you were going with that. That's certainly.
I think that's where that was leaning, was not that it couldn't be staff, it can be staff, but there needed to be a designated person because communication it's all over the map.
And we have, one of the specifics why we leaned toward it being staff, or at least being reporting to staff, is that we have a 5-agency JPA. Some of them have different opinions, and we wanted to ensure the total objectivity representing the 5, not one of the 5, so the staff person wouldn't also, say, be a county employee or a city employee or a water district employee. It would be somebody accountable directly to the groundwater authority as a whole. And they would be, and accountable was a word I think made it in here somewhere. It was the responsibility and accountability, because our sense was that there was not a unified communications approach, if you will, to the previous one that everybody understood, because there were a lot of moving parts while we were doing development.
Yeah,
However, there's a caveat to that. It's called money,
right.
and our GA doesn't have much.
Yeah, it is something that does require resourcing. And it also depending, of course, on how much you're going to deploy and that kind of thing. It is common, and it is a best practice to have a singular point of contact. That is a normal best practice. A lot of times, and it depends on your structure, your organization, but you will sometimes see the GM take on a function like that as well. I don't know in terms of your situation how that would work, but those are that point of the designated person, that's pretty much a best practice.
I do have a question that has arisen in my mind since you're talking about this. Have you, in your assessment of what's happening with the GA here, had personal contact with the manager, Carol Kiefer Thomas, and I hope I have her last names in the right order, who is the general manager of the GA, who works for another firm? She's under contract.
So the GA provided to us the individuals that they wanted interviewed from the GA, and she didn't happen to be on the list.
She's online, by the way,
Yeah.
for this meeting.
So, well, hello?
She's on the meeting.
Is that Carol?
Hello.
Is that Carol? Hi, Carol.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi. I'd be happy to talk to you.
I'm sorry, I didn't notice you, Carol. I think it's
Oh,
very
hi, Judy.
important that you do talk to her.
Okay. Well,
Yeah, and-
I will once again lean to the direction of the GA.
Yeah.
That's
And
not
following
yeah.
one more piece on that thread, Carol did propose to the GA an additional, it was an 120K, Carol, this year?
Oh, for the, it was 60,000 for this year, and I think another 60,000 or so for 2023. Yeah, so
Right.
120 total.
Yeah,
Dave.
and you mentioned you would do part of that, but you were taking it under consideration with the Groundwater Authority, how that might be delegated, or they hadn't determined if it was going to be a new person with that sole responsibility or not.
Right, yeah. So I think you have a lot of options there. This is also an area I think you should talk to the Department of Water Resources about. This is something that they do sometimes support financially. So that may be, and that would be a new funds or different funds. So you might, depending on your situation, that might be something that you would consider doing. I can't speak for them, but that is something they sometimes support, depending, once again, on the situation. And that would be, so then in that case, it would be a contractor that would provide that. Okay. And then you also talked about, and I thought this was very interesting. I'm going to just do a quick aside. Right this minute, I'm in the process of also writing some national guidelines for levy guidelines. And so a lot of the best practices, when I was going through, I kind of have best practices in my head. So I'm going through, check. So the schedule, I think, is really important. One of the things that you want to do when you're looking at your communications is leveraging every kind of an event or activity, those types of things. That creates a really excellent opportunity to do outreach, especially if you're trying to reach people you don't typically do. Also, people largely appreciate projects, things they can see, things that are more tangible. A lot of times, especially in the planning process, this stuff is just so, sort of abstract that it's difficult to get your head around. But people definitely understand when they see a tank or something like that. That's really a nice opportunity. So it struck me that's probably what you were talking about as I saw that, but that would also be a best practice.
I just throw a comment in. I think that the GA, I would expect the GA to have an overview plan and schedule like that, to know how all the moving pieces fit together, what the expected results are of various efforts, and how they fit into the ultimate goal or goals that have been laid out. And so, to me, that's an essential management tool just for running the Groundwater Authority, much less communication.
Yeah, absolutely. absolutely. Okay, so some areas that really jumped out at us, and once again, they may be in your plan, it's just that they're not, because you have synthesized it, it didn't jump out. So the next item was the identified gaps. There, in our assessment process, we heard a lot about transparency and trust and legitimacy. And those of you who attended the meetings probably heard a little bit more about this. I'd be happy to dive into what that means. Please let me know if you need me to do that. But this is something that I think is really an identified risk for your communications process is not having that resolved. I've talked with Keith, your counsel, and I know that you've taken a lot of steps to try to correct that. Hi, Keith. To try and correct that. I suspect that your GM is also working on those sorts of things, and these were just things that had to do with paperwork and business processes and that type of thing. The legitimacy issue has to do with the view of the representation of the GA itself, who sits on the GA, how representation occurs, how representation occurs on this PAC or in the technical committee, and the need for people to see individuals like themselves present in these groups, in these conversations, engaged, and a sense that the people that are in those roles are speaking for them and that they in fact are represented. So that was a big issue. I think at the time, Regina, you were not a member of this group when we originally were you a member of the PAC when we first started doing the interviews? I think I just joined.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, when you joined, I think that was a really good example, having the well owners and the domestic, having the others here. It's very important to start building that sense that people are actually being represented. There was also a sense from the public anyway, that the recommendations that were made by the PAC were not necessarily fully considered by the GA. And that was a part of where the issues of trust and legitimacy were raised. And we heard these things, I'm going to say, very consistently. It was rare when we didn't hear them. This just jumped out. So this is an area where I'd really like to see some serious consideration about how to address that. And the second part had to do with the transparent discussion of technical issues. This was confusing to us, and in part because we are receiving information sort of second or third hand from people. So the way people were describing the situation, what they were saying was that when technical issues were being discussed, that they were difficult to comprehend. All of the data wasn't available. Some of the assumptions that had led to the discussions did not appear to be available. Access to materials. You mentioned that a little bit in your challenges. This is another area, though, these are fixable, this idea of the transparent discussion of technical issues. Those are things that you can address and that you can tackle. You can do that through joint fact-finding. You can set up certain kinds of criteria before you move into your discussions. So that would be an area I think you probably have some ability to impact. The next one also was the sense of engaging all the basin users and identifying the problem and prioritizing solution. For some stakeholders, there was a sense that there were their kind of favored folks and the ones that weren't, and not everyone really was able to come to the table and help in identifying problems and prioritizing solutions. We had people say that they felt like they had not been heard. Also, that no one had talked to them before. We were sometimes the first people that had talked to them. Another area where there's clear benefit would be in pooling resources to work together through collaboration. We appreciate and understand that because of some of the conflicts that hasn't necessarily occurred. And then finally, direct engagement with communities, which means physically meeting them where they're at. So when you're thinking about this location, sitting on the dais, and I'm a resident that would have had to drive an hour and a half in sometimes difficult weather and other kinds of situations at night. That can be just a huge barrier. And people, getting, another thing that I heard from even from some of you in my interviews was that you were having difficulty getting people to come to meetings. So by going into communities where they're at, where they're already having meetings, things like that, that's going to give you a lot more leverage, bang for your buck, and your time as well. So that'd be an area I think you could probably look at to improve your process.
One of the reasons the meetings are held in the city council chambers is they have the ability to put it on the web so that people can phone in and ask questions, and so that people can watch it. Whereas other places perhaps wouldn't have that opportunity.
Yep, and I think that's also important. I think this
Right.
it's an and both.
It was very important during the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that maybe is another thing to take into account. This all occurred at that time.
Yes.
Yeah, so that certainly is something that has to be considered. And
Not all of it. It's Sigma and the GA started in what, 2016?
you've been at it for a while.
2017?
You've been at it for a while. However, I will say, when we were interviewing people, we were just on the tail end of it. We had more than one meeting where we were on Zoom or we were sitting 10 feet outside with people. So all those things are true.
I don't think it's too much to ask or consider, though, having GA members actually attend, especially in locations like Trona or in Yokern, where some of those community members do have limited access to resources. And being able to physically interact or, see them, they're right there within your own community, it gives the impression, while not always, it makes a community member feel like they are being heard because you're there in their community, you're in their territory. So it's just a different set of dialogue.
Well, it's a 50-50 proposition. The people, if they want to be informed, need to make the effort to be informed. And the people who are in charge need to make the effort to inform the people.
Yeah, so we're going to say and both. Both those
It's a
things, yeah.
50-50 proposition.
I will say, I want to add to that, though. The thing that you are talking about is difficult to understand, and it is very difficult for members of the public to conceive of something that has a consequence that's 20 or 30 years out, or whatever that time frame is, especially when people are living with the immediacy of paying their bills this week, of managing whatever they're managing. So having people understand that something is important and they need to be engaged in it, that in of itself may need to occur before you attract the kind of engagement that you're hoping for. And so that might be a multi-step process. Go ahead, Dave. I'm so sorry.
No, you're exactly right. And there's a couple layers that we're peeling off of this. The phrases that we entered in our communication and recommendation, and I think in the formal plan, we talked about targeted stakeholder meetings, and that was exactly this.
Right.
A component, one of those targeting was the remote communities and areas and the types of different pumpers or users. So, perhaps we need to add more words to clarify that, but that was part of our consideration.
Yeah.
Well,
And
the fact of the matter is the customers of the Indian Wells Valley District, Waters District, became a lot more interested when the replenishment fee and the pumping fee occurred on their bills.
that will definitely get someone's attention. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, all right. And they also, I once again appreciate you had 12 pages and there was a lot more to it. So also just physically, farmers markets, fairs, those types of things. There's lots of places to be in conversations where people are already at, rather than asking people to come into this kind of a setting. Okay. All right. So one of the things that also jumped out at us was this sense of what communications and engagement were. So there seemed to be, and this, I keep backing up because I don't mean to sound critical, especially given the 12 pages. A lot of what we observed were communications versus engagement. So communications really not being a two-way conversation, but being information that's being projected at people. And that can be quite difficult to get attention of a member of the public. Sometimes in message development, we talk about you need to have the same message 8 times before it even gets into the brain cell. So when I talk about this, I help people think about, if you think about the way TV advertising is done, and they have that, like for about 5 weeks, they run one very long commercial, and then they start shortening it up. It's the same commercial, right? It's because they know that that's saturated at that point, and they can just keep hitting on it and hitting on it. So that's a communications tactic that they're using. So it's sometimes it's very frustrating if you're a person that's trying to do communications and you're thinking, I've already told them once, I've already told them twice, I've already told them 3 times. And what I'm saying is you may have to tell them 8 times or more before you start to get that kind of saturation. And it really can feel very frustrating. So I just want to appreciate that. The other thing is just on scale, tactics, your general processes, continuous improvement. So one of the things that I talked to Dave about just briefly was sometimes you have an action plan, but your scale talks about what the reach is. So one size doesn't fit all. You just raised that a minute ago. There are certain targeted audiences. There's different kinds of scales, very intensive outreach for certain kinds of audiences. So that nuance really is something that needs to be resolved. The tactics were also not necessarily present. There were some general conversations about things like social media and those types of things, but that can be really quite a broad brush. There are some communities that are even doing things like billboards. They're doing things in grocery stores. Some water districts have worked this. There's a campaign called Day Without Water, and in one town they have the coffee wraps that go out on the coffee cups, and there's a water message on the coffee cup, on that, that little foam thing that they put on the outside. That's an amazing kind of a conversation. That's Kansas City, by the way, that does that. Another even beer breweries. I don't know if you have any here in town, but if you did, do you indeed? Okay, well, there you go. Go talk to your
Well-
They're not in town, but they're in the valley.
I can add to that.
Yes.
When I first got on the water board in 1985, my son was a freshman in college and brought home, where he got it, I'm not quite sure, but it was a Coors business card. And on one side it said Coors, and on the other side it said conserve water, drink beer.
Yeah. There you go.
So
There you
Lisa,
go.
just to clarify and make the point, this is what you mean by tactics. I think we call those methods.
Yeah, I think we attempted to address some of it, but I would agree with Lisa. I don't think
It's broader
we.
than we addressed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we probably
Yeah.
could take it a step
No,
further
that-
and actually address it.
This discussion's helps clarify this comment.
Yeah, and I think, again, it doesn't need to be in your 12-page, I would just call that your strategy, but you probably have an action plan. You talked about an integrated schedule. Those are the kinds of places you can put these kinds of details. I just was looking to support you in that. You do want to have a feedback process, and I didn't see that built into your plan. And that's a way of finding out how your messages are landing, how your communication activities are actually working. Are you seeing changes as a result of them? So you want to think through how are you going to measure that, and what would that feedback process be for that, so that you can do continuous improvement. So I know we have some military people on the stage here. So it's just your standard plan, do check act, all the things that you've learned.
I think we had 2 spots for that. One was on social media, kind of monitoring it, because a lot of stuff is on social media now. And I believe at one point, I don't know if it stayed at the end. I'd have to relook at the C&E plan again. I believe surveys were proposed, which seemed to have been not super effective, but they were effective in like the facilitation. People do engage with it, so.
Yeah, we were pleased with that. That was actually a pretty decent response rate for this particular community, given the distribution and the type of audience we were looking for.
I think one of the main feedback processes we were worried about was nobody shows up at these meetings.
That is feedback. Yeah.
And that's what I consider to be engagement, when the person has learned enough to show up and become engaged. It's a two-way street. So
We have 300% engagement in this room than we had the last 3 PAC meetings.
Okay.
300%.
Right.
I'm glad that I'm a draw.
It's usually just my husband, Don. You've met already.
Thank you, Dawn.
And now we've got Skip
Yeah.
And Ron.
Ron, thank you.
Yeah,
Senior moment.
I know, and I know you, I have, part of my team is online also. Emily's on the line. Most of you have met her, so.
I neglected to introduce Emily Finnegan, obviously with Stantec also.
Yeah, so she's here actually making sure I don't say something wrong. I should have pulled out my phone and make sure if I was getting text messages. So I'm hoping she can just jump in if I misspeak. Okay.
You're doing a great job, Lisa.
Okay. All right, thank you, Emily. I was, these virtual meetings, that's the other part, you get that voice from the ceiling, and it's a little
Right.
unnerving. Okay.
It's just God speaking to you.
It is. It's the gravitas. I think she brought her tenor voice to the conversation. All right. So you identified, we had some identified venues. There are some of the things that you might do when you develop your action plan is talk a little bit about the tools that you already have and any new activities that you're looking for. So it's just kind of a little bit of an inventory. Once again, this is for action planning. I think in your integrated schedule, what you were talking about, the frequency of activities and responsible parties, that is something that you can delegate in terms of particular activities, asking, especially if you're trying to do targeted communication. So let's just say you have a couple of domestic well owners, perhaps asking them to help take that on as in helping to do the targeted audience. We're doing some work right now with Groundwater Sustainability Agency, and we have just been tickled pink. We had about 10 ag-res users. Those are people, residential, light agriculture, not commercial agriculture, and large parcel kinds of users. So we got about 10 of them that formed a planning committee, and they have planned all of our ag-res meetings. So we've been able to start a domestic well conversation, talking about the community coming up with their own monitoring processes, how they can move forward. And they just held a workshop that they themselves, we supported them with it, but they pulled it together, and they can get 100 people to a meeting, or 125, and that's their audience, their target audience. So those are some things by using the members of this group, particularly since you are representative, and gets people into different kinds of conversations. Also, with that particular community, they all have wells, they care about them, and that gets people to the meeting. We had really good help from homeowners associations. They have some large they're homeowner associations that pulled together. They walked door to door and dropped flyers. I mean, it was amazing. This is these 10 volunteers, and they're not even members of the GSA, they're just volunteers. Okay.
I would have a question about that. Who decides the content of those flyers? That's one of the challenges we have is if we're going to have somebody speaking, they need to somehow have an approved message.
Yeah,
and if the
so-
commercial runs and runs and runs, and I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Let me.
That needs to be approved and
I'll just talk about that particular meeting. And again, these are just some things that came to mind as I was looking at your plan. That particular meeting, that group, the volunteers, met with, there are 5 GSAs that work together on one GSP. They met with all 5 managers, and the managers sat down, agreed on who the spokesperson would be to go over the materials. my team happened to help them put together the actual flyers and the slides and things like that. They were run by the person that oversees, there's a GSP point of contact, which happens to be one of the GSA managers. So he was the one that had the final content review. And then a member of one of the GSAs helped to introduce the topics, and then the general managers of several of the groundwater agencies also spoke. So it was, however, it was this volunteer group. They got the room, they did all the invitations, dropped the flyers, and then the content was provided by the GSAs. So, because, and which was, and they wanted, that's what they wanted as well. They wanted the best information.
Well, I have a question for you. We're an advisory committee. So we have given twice now the Groundwater Authority our advice in the form of communication and engagement plan, but it is their responsibility, at least in my mind, to carry it forward. We have no authority other than we meet here and we collectively come up with, we think you should do whatever it is. So it appears anyway to me that there's a breakdown in going from one group of people to another group of people. The GA has no staff except they have hired Carol and her firm. They have also hired, and they did that in the beginning, Stetson engineers who put together the GSP and the plan of action. The technical advisory committee meets with Stetson engineer staff. There's this big gap. If they also have no committee meetings.
Okay,
They're
well,
like the water district over here and the city over here. They have committee meetings where issues are broken down into categories and discussed by the finance committee and whoever's in charge of the project. That committee discusses it, and people can go to those meetings. RGA has no committee meetings.
okay,
And for myself personally, for myself as a board member of the Eastern Kern County Resource Conservation District, as a former board member of the Water District, as a member of the public, as a taxpayer, I feel that there's this gap between the public, that's what we are here, a collection of the public, and the GA. There's also the issue, and it's a serious issue, of all the lawsuits that are there.
so Judy, just in terms of the, I think everything you're saying is really important, and what I think would be helpful, if it's okay, is for me to just kind of jump into the C&E part of it, and then we're going to actually have some more questions. So if I could pull that back into that part of it, is that all right?
I don't care what you do, I'm just bringing it up because I can tell you that people are concerned about getting together, for instance, as domestic well owners perhaps, and discussing and deciding things when there are these lawsuits.
So all those things are true, and there are things that can be talked about that are not in the lawsuit. So for example, in the example that I just gave, there are people that were interested in finding out how they could monitor their own wells and how they could learn more about what was going on with the process. And those were things that those 10 volunteers, not even anyone appointed, came together and said that would be important to us. We're willing to do the work. We just need information. And they were able to get that from the group, from the GSAs. And those are things that the GSAs actually are, that's appropriate. Those are the kinds of things the GSAs should be talking about. So there are things that that you are describing that would be very consistent with some of the concerns that we saw in the conversations, which was these gaps and the sense of that the public had, whether or not things were transparent, whether they could be talked about. All the things that you just talked about, Judy, are definitely things that we heard. So thank you for raising
And we do
them.
have a well monitoring program.
Well, that's great. Then that's a wonderful thing to talk about. That's a piece of content that can be brought forward, and you have a lot of ability to activate. You don't need permission to talk about things that are already happening. So, moving on. Okay. Oh, yeah, the other thing, sorry, I just skipped ahead here. Also, the process for incorporation, like how you're actually going to take the communications and engagement and how you're going to take that into your GSP update. I think you're just about ready to start working on that, if I'm not mistaken. Especially you guys are on a faster schedule than everybody else. All right. So one of the things that we were asked to do was to talk about we were asked to come in to do an assessment to decide if there was an opportunity for continued collaboration in the basin, that people could work together and get more things done. So that's the thing that we've been asked to measure, and the thing that we're going to be going back to talk to the Water District about. There are some very specific things that need to be present. This particular list that I have in front of you is something I know you may not know my background. I am the former associate director of the Center for Collaborative Policy at Sacramento State University. And this was a piece of work that was done by the center. We studied multiple hundreds of cases of various collaboration efforts, looked at conditions for success. And this was a synthesized list of the things where when people were entering into deliberative dialogues that really needed to be present. These are the factors that make something likely to be successful. If the conditions are not present, and we find that in an assessment, then you have a conversation about can we shore them up? Can we do some mitigation? Can we bring it around to where we can manage the fact that that condition may be weak or the fact that it's not present? And so that's why looking at the list is so helpful. And then you get to decide. So one of the things the Water District will have to do is take a look at this list, and we'll come back with everything we've learned to talk to them about it and say, hey, does that make sense? Then we will also, because we are here being sponsored or being funded by the Department of Water Resources, we will also be providing the same information to them. So the first thing that you're looking at in terms of the conditions for success is that there is actually a sponsorship for it. There's a financial sponsorship because there are costs. So for example, let's say you move into a deliberative dialogue of some sort or any kinds of collaborative processes. Judy just raised this beautifully a few minutes ago, which is that you need content. You'll maybe need a technical team to do a PowerPoint. Maybe Carol needs to do something. There may be some organization involved. So that costs money to do that. There needs to be a financial commitment. And that's true even if you have a facilitator that's being supported by the state. There needs to be a societal sponsorship for it and an informational commitment to the process where people are willing to bring information to the table and actually sponsor what's happening. A situation assessment should be conducted. We have done that, at least an initial one. One of the things that you do in the situation assessment is find the areas where you think there are issues that can be explored and how you might move forward with them. We have identified some. I would also say that if you decide to proceed, we would also want to do an assessment of some of the technical issues that could be discussed, particularly understanding that you are in a situation where there's litigation, so there are things that cannot be discussed. So you have to do some trade-off with that and take a look at what that looks like. The stakeholders must be identified and categorized. So what that means is that the people there need to be representative of the community, and they also need to be people that have, for lack of a better term, they have to have skin in the game. They actually have to have some relationship to the content. They're not just observers that have showed up into the process. These are people that are, going to do the heavy lifting that it takes to get the work done. In process design, what that means is that the people that are in this process are also involved in talking about what the process looks like. One of the things that happens when you go into, sometimes you see these things, these big international negotiations. Sometimes it takes months to even negotiate the shape of a table. I don't actually think I have the temperament to do that. I probably would not do very well in that setting. But that's so important, like where people are going to sit, how observers are handled, is there going to be voting, what is the decision process? All of those are things that the people who are involved in the process need to have input into. The process should be interest-based and systemic. And does everyone know what that means when I say interest-based? So kind of it's like the win-win kinds of things. And then systemic means that you're not just picking out little parts of it, you're understanding that any kind of a conclusion that you're making is one that addresses the whole. It's not just going to piecemeal something. In some cases, very large, particularly water-related types of deliberations, you will have staging, and then there's an agreement about what the staging looks like. But there's always a sense of the whole system, not just parts of it. The decision-making needs to be transparent and collaborative. It's also advertised and known in advance. There needs to be appropriate resources, technical and policy resources available from the stakeholders and the sponsors. And then you need to have a commitment to implementation. So at the end of the day, people are accountable for the agreements that they make. So these are the conditions that you really need to have to move forward in a collaborative process. With that, what I wanted to do was to find out from you your assessment of whether or not these conditions are present, the way you think they should be measured, and if there are any conditions that are missing that would need to be unique to this particular location. So that's where I think we talked about kind of having this conversation. I don't know if David, is there a process that's just best, or should I just kind of open the floor with that? I can go back to the slide, or do you want to call a group, or you want me just to work it, or?
You're doing fine, and this is your profession, so.
Okay.
I would say we'll do it in two phases, perhaps. First is the table, the PAC, and then since it's an agenda item, you can do the public comment if we have any in the room or online.
Great.
So
Okay.
just engage the PAC members like you have been.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I appreciate that, and I always defer to the chair. So, okay. So let's talk about the first one. To what extent are the conditions present? So here's the list. And this would be, once again, this is a conversation we'll be having with the Water District. I really am happy I can be here tonight, though, to talk to you, because I think what you have to say is really important. And I'd like to be able to bring that back to the Water District. So the first one is sponsorship. Right now, we do know that the Water District has committed to be involved in this process. They have absolutely provided resources. Right now, also, the GA also, like, things like photocopies, arranging for rooms, all those things. And those are things that both the GA and the Water District have provided so far. Judy did raise, though, the fact that is a limited budget. You talked a little bit about talking to Carol about your communications function and how that was going to cost money. So that, it appears, I would right now probably say that is present. And I guess I would just check in with all of you and say, is that right? Am I reading that correctly? Is there anything you would change about that?
I would disagree.
Okay.
So what we've definitely seen, even though I don't live in Ridgecrest, so I'm not impacted by a lot of the fees at the present, doesn't mean it's not going to happen down the road. Societally, what I've at least seen is there is not support there. There is from some, but the majority is either not present in the conversation, hasn't been well informed enough to be present in the conversation, hasn't bought in to this conversation yet. And it may take a few more years now that it's biting their wallets. It might take a little bit longer. But some of the stuff with just getting, sponsorship for this, whether it be from GA buy-in or water district buy-in or Cyril's domestic water company, because they're who provides my
Yeah,
water.
They would be you've got stakeholders, right? also.
Yeah. So in sponsorship, I would say that we are still lacking relatively significant in my view.
I think Regina hit a key point. Excuse me. It's called bought into it. And it ties right into what I said when I first spoke about denial, that we have a problem. And it's an unfortunate thing. I bring this up often as a comparison. It's myself and another lady who's now deceased. We were both diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer at the same time. She chose to go to herbalists and people like that, and she passed away several years ago. I chose to go the scientific route, helped out by more science by my own husband. Here I am, ornery as ever. There are some things that can't be denied in life. You may not like them, but that doesn't make them go away. And how you get people to buy in is a $64,000 question, or should I guess with inflation I should say million?
Well, I think, once again, that's why your communications and engagement plan is so important. Camille, I haven't heard from you yet. Do you have thoughts about this list?
About the whole list or just that very first one?
Go ahead and just jump in wherever you'd like.
I agree with Judy for the most part, both on the people in denial. The vast majority of people will always be in denial. Those are not necessarily the ones that are going to be involved in making decisions. I think a lot of them don't actually want to be involved in making decisions. They're perfectly happy having decisions made for them. But as far as just having everybody heard and thinking that their inputs are going to be taken into consideration, that's another issue. I think that Judy is right, that there are some gaps that we have in communication, even in between the groups, with the Groundwater Authority itself. Some of these things I see that you have, I don't think we do at all. The assessments part, I think, is quite lacking. And I think part of that is the process that we've been using these many years just didn't involve that type of thing. And so that's not something that we've considered, although now that you've put it on the list, it seems pretty self-evident that we should. And so there are things like that that we've missed. Whether or not these items at this stage can be addressed and put in as part of the process, whether that would be advantageous, I don't know.
Thank you.
You know, we have a GA that has 3 members that do not live here. As a matter of fact, the one member, the representative from San Bernardino County, we've never seen him. He doesn't come, he calls in. And I think since we are going to make a presentation to the GA of changing what we've already presented to them perhaps. I think it's important that those members who do not live here come to the meetings at least once in a while so we can see their faces.
So these are all things then, when you're looking at these conditions for success, so the sponsorship, I think you raised that nicely, that those would be some things we'd want to flag as appearance of commitment, both by the public and as well as the authorities.
Well, the rest of them, so, I mean, I thought we were going to go in order, but that's okay. So with the rest of them, this group is fully aware of my opinion on especially that right-hand column. Most people are, because even all these years later, I am still very, very salty, as is my community, as they should be. When it came to the process design, when the GA was first introduced, we didn't have a say in that. The residents themselves were never consulted. The county was, but the county never came and talked to us. We never met with Bob Page, ever. The entire time he was our representative. Mr. Itmeyer has, although some things have changed in the last couple of years. He's very busy. So, things have kind of shifted, and that happens in a political environment. The win-win scenario was never presented to Trona. It was actually, let me hit you on the head with it, is how it felt. Not how it was intended, but that was how it was received.
Right.
And, this thought that, everybody should have a say. It's not always how it works. And unfortunately, we've seen it. It's been brought to light. We talked about equity at the last meeting quite in depth. There's a lot of these components on this list that in terms of just the community that I represent, not to be a negative Nancy, I don't see them changing. I don't see a commitment from the GA as a whole to necessarily change those things.
So this is part of what the important conversation is. If you talk about going forward, I think it's important to stipulate that people's experience that they've had is the experience that they've had. And that was true for the last 7 years, essentially. That process has been working its way through, and everything people have experienced is what they've experienced. We have to stipulate to that. So the question in front of us right now is, can we move forward? Can that be changed? Can the conditions for success be constructed? If they're not present now, can they be constructed? And that's a tough question. That's a question, again, that's going to have to go back to the board and to the GSA and everybody else to say, are we in a situation where we really could move forward in a different way? There is a lot of research about why that's a good reason. There are a lot of good reasons to do it and why you might want to do it. And there are also reasons that are complex. In the world that I come from, it's called the best alternative to negotiated agreements. And sometimes there are other ways that decisions are made. And those are things that are beyond my scope. But what I can say is that for those that wish to move forward in a different kind of a conversation, here is how you construct it. Here are the things that you need to have present. So I know you have federal representatives also on the PAC. I would, is it all right if I ask you, Thomas, I mean, especially working for BLM, you've had experience with some of these CLARI processes. Do you have any observations about them?
Sure, since you asked specifically to BLM. To get to a transparent decision, you have to lay out the groundwork and the facts. And generally, you have to have agreement of what the baseline facts are. And the GA does have its website. We have talked about, having issue papers that are specific and nail down, specifically what the facts are. That way, when you get to the decision-making time, you can make the relationship to get to a rationale for the decision. And you know, the GSP had a very tight timeline to be on, not unlike, you know, the documents that we work on at the Bureau of Land Management. A lot of distrust seems, you know, is still within the community. And, you know, we experience it too. Some of it you can deal with. I heard one of the other board members say some people are okay with others making decisions for them. You know, they'd rather, you know, that not be at the forefront, you know, pushing the button, and so to speak. I think the issue is, you know, we have many issues, and these things, they all need to get better. You know, Trona wasn't brought into the process in the beginning. You know, although they had a representative, but don't feel like they were represented. That kind of healing takes time to overcome and to get brought in. You know, the power struggle of who gets to make the decision and who gets to benefit from it is always there. I think the key to this is right now, you know, we need the bedrock facts bolstered to the wall. We don't have enough water. We're using too much, you know, won't replenish fast enough. Okay, can everybody agree on those things? And without that, it's hard to move forward because things are expensive, it's too slow, not the right people are getting served. You know, until you can get beyond those things, it's going to be perpetuating, you know, these same feelings. And, you know, so, you know, the Bureau of Land Management, we make decisions with the best available information. That doesn't mean we're going to run out, you know, and get reams of data on every topic, but we're going to use what we have. And sometimes people don't like that, but those are the rules that we play under. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think perhaps as the PAC, you know, our role here is to urge the GA to reestablish the ground rules, help people to understand where, you know, where they're playing. You know, the city has a lawyer here observing, you know. I think that the public, you know, not being fully engaged. I'm sorry?
It was just someone who didn't realize they weren't on mute.
I was saying, you know, the public not being fully engaged with how decisions like this are made, you know, generally have a limited understanding of civil government, just generally have a disdain or a lack of trust for it. This board is going to have to work through that, or excuse me, the GA board, but every one of us here is recognizing that more information needs to be coming forth, and it needs to be more transparent. And, you know, you need to get back to the basics. That's how I started out, right? We all need to agree on what the base problem is and then move on. Mm-hmm. You know, the GSP was based on a scientific model of how much water is in storage and is recharging. Can we get to a point where everybody says, okay, whatever warts it has, it's good. It's the most scientific thing we have. It's the best. Unless somebody brings something else forward that everyone likes. You know, got to build on each of those successes. You know, and in December, we're going to hear about the board's preferred route for a proposed pipeline. Mm-hmm. You know, there's people who are still back, you know, saying we shouldn't build a pipeline. We should be conserving. Okay, well, the decision has essentially been made in the GSP to move forward to a pipeline. So, without rambling, you know, you asked the Bureau of Land Management how we deal with these things. It's best available information. We publish our decisions so that everyone can read the rationale and the facts that went into it. They can read the analysis, and then they can disagree with us through an appeal process, or if that doesn't work, they can take us to court. we don't like that. So we try to deal with it with a rationale, developing a relationship with those people involved. So, sorry to ramble, folks.
No,
but-
I appreciate, I appreciate your comments, and I also appreciate the Bureau has engaged in many collaborative processes to take on thorny issues and been able to get to better outcomes. I think you yourself and your borough program would be an example of the larger Bureau needing to take on tough issues. So, and it's the same, the Navy obviously has some excellent capacity or skills with this. Is that something you feel comfortable talking about, John?
Most of our processes are, obviously, it's the federal government. We have the same set of rules that we have to follow. Definitely transparency's been one of the big ones the Navy's consistently try to put forward. When we're asked questions, we've been very open with it. We haven't hidden any agendas or anything else. And it's definitely been appreciated from the community. We do hear that we're that way. The Groundwater Authority hasn't had the same.
We received in the assessment, we actually received very nice feedback about the Navy and being a good neighbor and those kinds of things. That was a consistent theme.
Right. And most of these groups in the past have worked very closely together. Once Sigma came in, that obviously changed the dynamics quite a bit. And as we progressed with the litigation, which I obviously can't go into,
Right.
It's changed those dynamics further and how those different groups are interacting. There is definitely a need for everyone to come together, though, when it comes to the science. Right now, there's very diverse opinions on the science. At some point, it's got to come together. So it's how do we get there and get everyone to that stage? Once you can get that, then definitely, I think you'll get more of these individuals to come together, but that's going to be a major hurdle.
Yeah, that definitely popped out at us as well when we were evaluating the situation. There are things that can be done. There are joint fact-finding processes. There are criteria setting, the kinds of things that you put in advance. These are fairly common processes. There were a lot of things that happened, but to go back to the stipulation of everyone's experience is what it was. Things were moving very, very fast. That was not just true for you. That was true for all of the basins that were critically overdrafted. People just kind of were jumping in and working like crazy. And some of the things that were perhaps things that are nice to do got left in the wayside. The really good news for all of you is that doesn't have to continue. That's something you can change. And so that's the reason for this conversation, is that doesn't have to continue. There's an opportunity. You're going to be doing an update. You have an opportunity with your communications plan as you're starting to implement your management actions. Those are things that as a community, you can begin to be in different kinds of conversations. So let's go ahead and keep looking at this list then. We kind of just opened it up. Regina was able to quickly run through some things. But and I think, Thomas, do you feel pretty comfortable in terms of that you've addressed the kinds of things here on the list and any other gaps that you're seeing?
Well, I think I kind of talked about every one of those things. If you have a specific question,
No,
ask it.
I think you did too. I just wanted to make sure.
It's a complex process to go from a proposal through a public process, taking input, doing analysis so that you can come up with alternatives, analyze the effects of those things, and then rationalize a decision that people get to look at and pick apart if they like. A lot of decisions made by governing boards don't have that. They're made on the spot. Now, granted, they move faster, and it is one of the benefits of municipal government is it can move faster. But you don't get the luxury of sitting at home, reading the decision by the decision maker, and then deciding if you're going to do something about it, like appeal. Those aren't the options here.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Virginia, did you want to add anything else?
I think I touched on most of it. I mean, a lot of this stuff, just thinking about it, like I said, I don't want to be a negative Nancy on it. I've seen some positives come out of the facilitation or some of the meetings we've had. There's definitely interest. There's definitely some shifts, and everything does take time. I don't disagree with you. This process was very, very fast. And there was nothing anybody could do about it. I came in a little bit late to the game. I came in, I think the process was already 3 years in. But it's one of those things where there's, as things progress with like implementation in particular, or even some of the resources, as a community, I think it kind of goes without saying, in some respects, Trona's a giant question mark still of the what if. It's a what if. We rely on a third party, which is unique. It's very unique to this state. It's not done. I don't think there's any other location like us. So with a what if or a big old question mark on the back end, you build a pipeline. Well, what if? Okay, how does that help me? How does that help my community? How does it get to us if? And all of those have never been resolved. None of this is out in the open. Of course, we can't talk about it because there's a lawsuit.
Well, it does sound like, so for example, in the assessment, one of the things that you want to do is make a list of the issues that need to be clarified, the types of topics that would need to be on the table. So what you just said, that would be on that list. Those would be things that you would start to identify as things that would need to be resolved.
I believe Virginia is showing us what happens when you don't get involved late. She just brought up the issue of the pipeline. It's something that was in the GSP from the very beginning. But if you haven't kept up with it via, I'd say the newspapers, but apparently, unfortunately, newspapers are about to become extinct or something. If you don't keep up with it with looking on the website, and if you don't know the address of the website, which is something that should be advertised all over, then you can't keep up. And the website is critical to keep up. I think Carol and April are working on it. It turned out there were two websites. There was the GA website, and there is the IWVGSP website, which is organized and run by Stetson engineers, which had all the technical data and the GSP development on it. These two websites need to be put together, and they need to be easily available for all people to get to.
Yeah, those are all really good suggestions.
I mean, I do not consider social media a place to get factual information necessarily. I'm not saying you wouldn't, but you might not necessarily get it.
So
how would you discern the difference?
Right. There are a lot of different ways that different mediums are used, and all of that would kind of go into your action plan. So when you start developing your communications action planning, those would be the things where you're looking at what's the right medium to share these kinds of pieces of information. And that could very well, social media might be absolutely the best way to get somebody to a meeting, but it might not be the best way to evaluate the latest model for the water flows. I don't think Wes has had a chance to talk yet. Let me just check in with you.
You might have seen I was bubbling over here.
Yes, I think you need an opportunity to go through this list. What do you think?
Well, just an observation. I think I see this as a two-valued list. If I look at this from the point of view of how the GA and the GSP was developed, it makes sense. Also, I think one of the goals of the process you're putting together is to see if we can somehow voluntarily, all of the stakeholders can come together informed solution. So that you would, I think, follow the same approach for that. And I think there's some crossing over. I think enough of these things have happened along the way that if there were going to be a collaborative solution emerge from the stakeholders getting together, it probably could have happened. Enough of the foundation has been laid. Of course, we have to remember in this basin, we're overdrafted about 3.5 to 1. It's not like you're trying to solve a 10% problem where some folks can sit around a table and wring out that last 10%, solve that problem. So when I look at this from the point of view of the GSP and the Groundwater Authority, the sponsorship's been there. There's been money from the state, and it continues to be. The assessments have been done, although I agree with what John said, that we need, the technical basis needs to be accepted by folks, and recognizing that it's going to be a moving target. As we move forward, we're going to learn more about our groundwater, but we have a very good model, mathematical model, to lead us down that path. And so I think from the point of view of the GA and the GSP development, I think this process has largely occurred myself. Now, and I'm a little bit dubious whether we're going to have a spontaneous, collaborative, with the stakeholders solution of a 3.5 to 1 overdraft. So I think we need to do a better job of communicating the things that have occurred in the C&E plan, and we need to recognize that the assessment is going to be changing over time as a groundwater model and the measurements move forward as we implement the plan. So those are the kind of comments that I wanted to make, is that
I am so appreciative that you brought that into the conversation. As one of the things that's extremely difficult for the public to work with are changing conditions and information, especially when you're doing adaptive management and some of the things that you're all going to be doing. Conceptually, that's just really hard stuff to work through. So part of your communications planning really needs to take that into account to help people understand how information is evolving and how your circumstances evolving as well. So climate change and the other kinds of things that are, you do not have a constant state. And a lot of times people are like, well, last week you told me X, therefore what you're telling me must not be true. So there's some pieces there about how that gets communicated in a way that people can begin to understand it. And then again, also people being able to technically understand terms and things. A lot of times in this type of work, there are a lot of terms of art. So as a quick example, I helped put together a very large planning document, and the glossary that we wrote the report, we wrote the agreement. It took us 2 more months to complete the glossary. There was so many arguments about the terms. I'm looking at my federal friends on the DS because it involves some federal agencies. but these terms of arts are very important. And again, you're a member of the public. These are not words you use every day. So thank you for raising that.
just one other observation I wanted to make quickly, too. I think that some of us who have been on the sidelines or being part of this committee for some time, we kind of understand how these various elements have, to some degree or another, taken place. But nowhere in the website or anywhere else is there a document or a fact sheet that just simply states this is the process that happened.
Right.
The process has happened.
Yeah.
I think any of us here can explain it if talking to a member of the public if they have enough time, and I have enough time. But that, I think, is a big problem with the C&E that's happened, is that nowhere in simple terms has this good work that's been done been explained concisely for the benefit of the public.
Process transparency is very important. And once again, that's important for trust building. So, and there's a classic comment, which is, in the absence of information, people just make it up. And so these are the kinds of things, these are all things you can change. I want to just keep going back to that. A lot of the things that have happened that haven't gone well, they're things that can be changed. So I want to make sure, Lyle, I don't think you had a chance to.
No, I was waiting for you.
You knew I was
You were
gonna
coming.
get there.
No, yeah, it was coming at the right time because I wanted to speak a little bit on what Wes has just said too. But one of the things I haven't heard anybody say that I think our problem has been, and it's one of the things that us domestic and anyhow have toiled with, is called public education. How do we educate the public? And that's our problem here. How are you going to get to them? You can put all this stuff on websites, you can write it in the paper, you can send out a gajillion flyers, but you didn't make anybody read it. It's the old lead the horse to water, but you can't make it drink routine, right? So that is the problem, is public education. You could probably ask the average person on the street, does Ridgecrest have a water problem? And they go, what? No, we don't have a water problem. Every time I turn the tap on, the water comes out. We don't have a problem.
Right, that's very common.
And that's, yeah, I know. And that's, so what is our problem here? Public education. That's what our problem here is. You can use all kinds of different ways of saying it, but that is what we have to do here. So anyhow, that's a first
So,
step.
once again, these are things can be fixed. I mean, and some communities are doing dramatic things. They're doing billboards, they're using the little highway signs. There are a lot of things that can be done. Camille, did you want to add anything else to the conversation?
Not really. I think that the only thing I'd like to stress is that we are an advisory committee, and so we could have the greatest ideas and intentions, and if the Groundwater Authority chooses not to follow our advice, then they will not do so. So I think in some situations has happened in the past. It's hard to say what will happen in the future, but the stakeholders may have been involved, but only up to a certain point. And then at that point, litigation basically happened. So, if the Groundwater Authority wants to implement some of these things, that would be great. But we can have a great communications and engagement plan, and if it's just sitting there as 12 pages in a plan and doesn't get implemented, then we haven't really done anything.
I second what Camille said 100%. And I would add that when the GA was first formed, I believe it got off on the wrong foot, in part because of a couple of the personalities involved at the time who are no longer here. And my question to you is, how does one overcome that?
So the process of that we started with a little bit earlier, which is actually acknowledging what happened. So, and this
Okay.
is where this is what happened, this is what people experienced, and everyone gets to decide whether or not that was the most useful and productive way to move forward. And if they decide that there could be better or different outcomes, less painful, whatever the choices they make, that a choice can be made. A choice can be made to do something different. And then then that's the responsibility of the parties to say, do I choose to do that? The other thing I can tell you, after having done this for very many years, and I don't want to speak for your counsel who's present, but generally speaking, courts are quite favorable to finding out if there are stakeholder-generated solutions. Courts typically do look for a community to resolve problems. In anything that involves natural resources, it's very difficult for any entity outside of a community to manage it. So those are things that can be taken into account, and it's beneficial for the community to move forward that way. Also, you've just got a lot of heavy lifting to do, and it's going to be easier to do if more people are helping to do the heavy lifting. That's just kind of normal stuff. So, but that's all you can do is stipulate that happened. Yeah, it was Hatfield McCoy's. You shot my brother, I shot yours, and how about we stop? We could do that. We could stop.
One of the big issues, I think, still with many people is that the GA was formed as a JPA rather than creating a new government with elected officials. And I think that's one of the things that needs to be explained to the public as to why that happened.
Yeah, I think that, again, governance, these things are very difficult without some explanation. And many people don't really differentiate between levels of government.
Right.
That's just something that's quite confusing to most people. And sometimes even to me, and I've been doing this for a really long time. So all these things, again, all these things are true, and we get to decide what we do next, right? I just want to make sure, did you have anything else, John, you wanted to add? I haven't, Judy, did you have anything else you wanted to add? And did you look at the list? Anything else on the list?
I have looked at the list. No, I will reemphasize what Camille just said. We are an advisory committee, and that's all we can do. It's up to the GA. I think you should make a presentation to the GA at a GA meeting, but that's just one single person offering her opinion.
Thank
And
you.
I think you might want to see if the audience has something to say.
I'm going to go to your chair. I want to check in with Don, though. Don, I am going to be coming to talk to your board, so I didn't know if you wanted to weigh in at this point or how you'd like to proceed.
Sure, I can make a comment. Yeah, as I look at the list of the conditions, I think throughout the GSP process, development process, each one of these conditions has existed to one degree or another. Some have been more successful than others. And I think that's been a function of, as I look at these, several of them are dependent upon good communication and also resources. And the communication engagement plan that this committee has put together, I think that's critical in making this a success. But Judy made a point, Lyle made a point too about communication and the fact that it's a two-way street. The Groundwater Authority, the committees can put information out, but people have to receive it and do something with it. And I think that's been the problem. I think Judy made a comment earlier where she said that many people in town didn't even know about the Groundwater Authority or the GSP until they got their water bill. And got the shock of that increase of the fees being on there. And I can speak firsthand because we obviously are ground
You're the
zero
one getting the
for
phone call.
for all the phone calls when people get their bills. Just personal experience, earlier in the month, the community hosts a petroglyph festival, which is a big outreach opportunity. We get people come from all over, but it's also good outreach locally. And I was there on Saturday, and just the benefit of having one-on-one interaction with people. People would come by, you know, we give them free things, water
Right,
conservation
right.
items and literature, but they ask questions. And when they ask those questions and we answer their questions, sometimes they come over and they're angry. You know, my bill was 3 times more than it's usually. But when you talk to them and explain what the fees are for, why they're on their bill, they generally come around. And so I almost wish we had that opportunity more to have that one-on-one engagement with people to get them in.
That's a perfect example of the kind of targeted outreach I was talking about, where you go where the people are.
Right.
You're there, and then it just changes the dynamic. That's a great example.
Yeah, it's really refreshing when, like I said, somebody comes at you in an attacking mode, but you can kind of calm them down and when you give them information. So it just points out the importance of getting the information out to people, but then receiving it. And that to me has been the challenge. I think generally people are busy with their day-to-day life, and like Judy said, until they got their bills and saw that, I don't even think they knew that the Groundwater Authority existed or what they were doing. And that's kind of evident by the number of people that show up to these meetings.
Right. As you said that, it reminded me, so the little story I just told earlier about the groundwater, you know, the ag-res owners, the volunteers. That's what started it. They had to start paying $10 a year more. It was parcel tax. And they're all like, what is this? and all of us who do this for a living, we're kind of like going, are you kidding me, $10? Like, they were just beside themselves about it. That's what caused that group to come together. That's what got their attention. Otherwise, I don't think anybody would have paid any attention at all. But versus the farmers, by the way, in this same community, the Farm Bureau brought them in. It was very easy to get a hold of people and talk to them. So, yeah, thank you. Great observation. So now I'm going to go to the chair because I know you have members of the public, and I don't know your protocols.
Do Renee first, please.
Okay, Renee. Oh, would you mind, just so there's people online and they'd like to hear you. Thank
You can also grab a hand mic.
Would you like a hand mic instead? Would that you be more comfortable? And for the audio people, is she live with this mic? I'll turn this way.
Yes.
Okay,
He gave you a thumbs up back there.
there you go. Okay, so just stand wherever you're comfortable.
Just my comments on the list. I think that the GA has had most of those items. My quandary is I don't know how to get the public's attention because I agree with a lot of the comments that have been said because I had to seek out the precursor meetings and all that before the GA was ever formed. I've only missed 4 groundwater authority meetings, but I had to seek on my own all the information, and most people don't have the time. Their lives are too busy, and they don't want to get the local newspapers. So if you don't have that, you're not going to know anything going on with water in this valley until you get your bill, like everybody was saying. So I don't know if you can address this. Decision-making must be transparent and collaborative. The GA has been, I think, is pretty open on most things, although they've probably hedged on a few where they weren't quite as transparent. But if you go to the meetings, you know what happened. You know what I mean? And people don't go to the website. They don't, and all of them are videotaped now since January 2018. So that's over 4 years of meetings, almost 5 now. So I just think part of it is the people have to take responsibility in learning about their community. And I think that's a problem. And I don't know how to solve that. So, but I agree with that probably the GA has pretty much implemented some of what's on this list. And they could do better. But I think we're in a tough situation also with the COVID and everything else happening. People don't have time to go to meetings. So,
Yeah,
Thank
thank you. You can just hang there in case you want to talk again. All right. And then I don't know what your process is. If you want, did you want to add thoughts or did you want to go to the public?
Just a
or-
couple, and then you can go to the public. I resonate with a lot of the comments, almost universally, and many of them were similar that everybody had up here. But I noticed there were 2 things that struck me from a practical standpoint, and I tend to be focused on, okay, what can we do? What's the actions? One of them started with your comments early on about the societal commitment and sponsorship and where that was lacking. And I think, and there was also one about the sponsors financially, and I think there's a link there. 2 observations. Number 1, on the societal connections, the baseline, the basin setting in the valley, the model, all those things that are foundational that some people don't understand because it's technical or they haven't been able to get into it. We talked extensively in this group about how to address that, and we made 2 recommendations specifically focused on that. we gave a prioritized set of recommendations, and that foundation was the first one to tackle with a fact sheet and information, general fact sheet in layman's terms. The second one was, more detailed stuff if you want to get into it to back it up. There were several other functions, all that would build public confidence and trust. And the second part of the recommendation was that we hold, on those prioritized items, we hold workshops with the public. So it's an exchange. Most of us in this room, not all, went through thousands of hours of TAC committee and policy committee. We were usually half the audience observing that whole process in detail. That's not what the public ever had access to unless they were able to do those thousands of meetings. And some of the early ones weren't available. They weren't taped. You couldn't, if you weren't there, you weren't going to see them. So I think that's one of the things that may not have come across clearly, what the tie-in to stakeholder collaborative conditions for success adds to the importance of that recommendation. And it was one of our 4-pillar recommendations. The second thing was that tie together with the financial. There is a large portion of the community, I believe, that is in denial because of the magnitude of the financial solution options that appear to be out there. And there's a fear that comes with, my God, this community of this valley of roughly 35,000 is never going to be able to afford, hundreds, if necessary, millions of dollars of solutions. Now, we have 100% so far grants received, and there's a lot of folks, me included, working day and night to line up the future to make sure that's as close to 100% funded we can be. But the process, Camille, I think, mentioned this, we have to go through to get we're going to be selecting the options for where the pipeline is going to go. Then we have to select the route. Then we have to go through the agreements on all the right-of-ways, and there are several different entities that control them. It's not just BLM or Navy. And then we've got to get a design for whatever route is connected. We got to have it completed to the 30% level to even apply for a grant. The 30% design is usually 30% of the cost of the project. So you're talking big money for even that. But as I said, there's a lot of work. I and many others are setting up things available. They're available now, but we've missed some windows because we've delayed. When the public starts to see that, and this is where we think the integrated schedule and the management actions schedule and links and the steps that are going down through it, including the funding, they start to see that gap close. They'll gain credibility and trust, and some of the denial will come out, I believe, because that's a big gap that some people do not think it's surmountable. I do, because I'm working in that environment.
Are you doing things like the Day Without Water, the national events? Are you tapping into those?
I'm sorry?
There are several national events like Day Without Water. It's in October. Some other types of things. I can get those for you.
No, I'm working, what I was speaking specifically.
No, I understand. I was just talking about the communications and outreach. There are other initiatives that are done that help you leverage some of the work you're doing. So, yeah.
I have not personally.
Okay.
If I understood what you're asking.
Yeah, I think so. Okay.
If you want to open it up to the public, if they have
yeah.
any comments, I know your purpose here was to get the feedback from us primarily, but.
I very much, and I'm so appreciative. I am so appreciative of you giving me this time today. Thank you so much for doing that, and I really appreciate your feedback. I would love to hear from the public. Yeah.
There they are.
You got one over there.
There.
That's Don.
I need is my microphone on? I don't think so.
It's on.
Oh, it is now. The denial that is in the public that we are actually not in overdraft goes back decades. Judy and I have been fighting the water war, if you will, in our various ways. And some of our close friends, Lyle has been with us for quite a long time too. So the problem that we face is not just something that has come about in the last 7 years. The real problem that the GA is trying to solve goes back, it was recognized and understood when I first came here in 1970. And I made my first presentation to the Board of Realtors in about 1971 on the same subject. Are we really in overdraft in this valley? And the data was quite clear. The denial, once it takes place, once it's in the mind, it cements itself, and I don't think you're ever going to remove it.
So Don, looking at this list, are there things that jump out at you in terms of the conditions for success? Are there
Well,
things that you see on the list that you would want to flag?
You're steering me to something that is on your list. I'm telling you something that is transcendent. It's a public denial of a problem. And your list is pretty intense and inclusive. However, there are lots of areas that involve public participation and public even voting that don't necessarily have all of those elements involved. It is not necessary to have all of them. And some of them may be imperfect even. But you've got to have a few of them that are really nailed down. There's no question about it. I won't go into any detail about the various things that have happened that actually Judy and I have been a team in this basin for a long time. And the secret to communication, I think it really is kind of one-on-one. As a old-time contributor, educator in the water area, I have written it's about 12 pages of simplified hydrology of the Indian Wells Valley simplified hydrology with examples from the Indian Wells Valley. And I have printed and handed out now, I don't know, probably 1,000 copies, many reams of paper. In fact, I've worn out 3 printers. Not just on that, of course.
That is commitment. I'm gonna interrupt for just a second, and so the thing that I've been asked to do is to go back and make a recommendation as to whether or not there's a good opportunity to move forward in a different way, and a way of bringing people together and getting things done differently. And I absolutely understand, and we've talked about how important it is to acknowledge what's happened so far. But based on that, these are the things I'm measuring. These are the things that I have to say, do we have sufficient presence of these kinds of things where the conversation could look differently? Is there a way to move forward that would allow this process to work better? So based on that, that's why those questions are up there. What is your sense of this? Is it possible for this to work better, or are we just stuck with the situation we have?
Of course, it's possible to go forward, and we have. There is definitely an improvement in the public's understanding of what's happening. The problem is really complex, and the confusion that results from it is part of the denial. If you don't really understand it, pick the simple route, and that's the answer. Not necessarily, though.
We have a saying in change management, and that is, denial works until it doesn't.
Surely. And in the case of the water problem, denial leads to disaster. The public that cannot, is unwilling to bend and actually listen and or read, it's the key to getting progress. That's why I'm bringing this up again and again and again. You know, your committee here is really interested in trying to, you know, reach out and to actually make progress in the direction that the GA has attempted. But with the denial aspect as such a strong presence, I think that no matter what cleverness you try, you're going to not really reach the goal. I don't mean to be really negative here, but I think it's a problem that it's been with us for so long.
So the way I would characterize that then in my conversation with the Water District will be that that's a significant barrier to success.
It's a significant barrier.
Yeah.
In fact, it wasn't very long ago, in the last 10 years, the Water District was actually in denial, the board. And the problem that we're talking about is not just the public.
Right, right. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to do that. I
Yeah,
see.
you're perfectly welcome. The amount of time that's gone into trying to educate the public and to try to educate the boards that have controlled our lives and our water is huge. And it's nice to think that we've made a little bit of progress, even if it's just a little bit.
Thank you, Don.
Hey, Lisa.
Hey.
Josh Nugent, Mojave Pistachios. First of all, I wanted to thank the Water District, the PAC, and David, and Stantec, and Lisa, and everyone for having this. And I wanted to say a little bit in response to that, and, you know, especially in farming, but in life, when there's a saying that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. Well, the second best time is right now.
Right.
You know,
That's right.
so.
Yeah.
Just to get them out of the way, I will say one of my three kind of transparency issues over time have been that it'd be nice to have a public model. It'd be nice to have full project costs for everything on the table so people can analyze them. And then some more transparency about the legal fee authorities for current and future fees. So I can check those off that I've said that, so I'll feel better driving home. But on a more positive note, I did want to say that I think getting more info and support for disadvantaged communities, especially Trona, Inyo Kern Community Services District, financial protection for ratepayers within the city of Ridgecrest, and then protection for rural and domestic pumpers. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Sam, who's probably watching, and also mention the water haulers, because they're another important group.
That was a really great ad from the public meeting that we did not have. Yeah.
And then I wanted to say specifically to your question tonight, I would say that, yes, there's sufficient inertia and willingness to move forward. Some of these areas may need to be worked on, but I'm sure you never have all of them 100%, you know. And then I'd say that, you know, maybe some night meetings on some of the major topics that came out of the last round, you know, maybe some more focused ones. I think the breaking into groups deal was actually pretty effective. So, so far I've been pleasantly surprised by the facilitation process and think it's been working pretty good, so.
Okay, so then your recommendation would be, looking at this list, there are some things that need to be shored up a little bit, but that appears to be good momentum then to move forward.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Great,
Okay.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other feedback from within the room?
Want to add anything?
Any feedback from online?
They'll talk to me in the hall. That's.
Okay, we have no one online feedback, so we'll take it back from you, Lisa.
Take it back from me. Thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it. I'll be taking everything that you've said. Once again, that'll be going back to the Water District. And I will, Emily's on the line right now. Emily, would you remind me about the social demographic
Yes.
piece, just to make sure that I don't forget to share that and make that a little more transparent? But as I said, that was something I did initially before we entered the basin. That helped us actually figure out whom we might be reaching out to. The other thing that Emily did was go through and she read every single comment to the GSP and sort of extracted some of the information from that. So we also took that into account before we started the process. That's how we actually met some of the people, was through that process. So.
I have a final comment. David brought up some things that we have discussed, and we all were in agreement with, especially looking back at how the GA started, which I brought up, and that was having workshop meetings which would get those interested public in a more relaxed format. And let's see, what was the other thing you mentioned? Yes, the financial statements. It's been mentioned by others. The general public, I'm not sure the GA board even knows exactly what's being spent, where it's being spent, and where it's coming from. And as David mentioned, there have been grants that the GA has missed. And we can't afford it, so we need to look for those grants.
Yeah, and once again, all these observations, everything you've been saying, there are ways to address them. So that's the part that gives me optimism is that you are in an existing state and many things can be changed.
Okay, and I know Lisa was on her way to Arizona, and that's why we changed the schedule to allow you to stop by on the way
Well,
and
I want
moved
to
it
say
today.
this, your regular meeting date is on a date that I'm supposed to be doing something with my husband. So it was you guys or a divorce. So I said, Dave, can we change this date?
She didn't say it was a
Surely you'd want
divorce.
to meet with us instead of your husband.
No,
but we thank you for the opportunity to engage, and I would remind folks, if you haven't done the survey, you have an opportunity, that QR code that's on the sheet up there will take you to the survey.
This will be open till December 12th. The very same questions I asked you, those are the questions on the survey. So feel free yourself if you'd like to answer it, if there are other people you know that would like to answer it. If you're online, I think, we'll be able to put this on the Water District Board also, the survey so the questions I asked today are questions that are the ones that are in the survey.
I'm sorry, you're asking what?
Oh, I think we can put this on your website also, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'll note it's Survey Monkey, not monkeypox.
No. Thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
Okay.
Lisa, I
Yes.
have one more quick question.
Absolutely.
How are other critically overdraft GSPs doing? I mean, how are the other basins doing in general? I'm assuming that since you said you're involved with a variety of different ones, you have your ear to the ground. And I was just curious about how the other basins are doing comparatively speaking.
All the critically overdrafted subbasins have heavy lifts. They all do. And the current, a lot of them are very dependent on imported water. And so there has been a lot of difficulty with the current drought in terms of people being able to use some of the management actions that would allow them to do some of the things they would normally need to do. A lot of them are experiencing fallowing. They're moving into those kinds of programs. There have been significant fee implications in many other locations. There are a variety of governance structures. In fact, we worked with Fresno State. If anyone's interested in these things, we just did an evaluation of all the governance structures, and JPAs are absolutely one of them. But it is, again, different types of governance structures allow people to move differently. And so that has sometimes impacted what people are doing. So it's, no one's had an easy road. This particular basin has had some more conflict maybe than what some others have experienced. Some of it is being contained. I think maybe I don't want to say that it has more conflict. It may be that it's more public. I think that perhaps there's plenty of conflict in the other ones, but they're not, it's not showing up in the same way. So I don't want to say that, I don't want to measure that. But does that help, Camille?
Yes, I was just curious.
Yeah, it's not, the medium, the ones I'm working with that are medium, we've actually kind of started cutting them loose. They haven't needed help. They've been able to kind of just move on, and they've had good communications plans. They've been able to implement them. So there's some of them we're actually going through the process of kind of weaning them and saying you really don't need the outside assistance. This is capacity that can be built internally, and that ultimately is really what you want. You want the community not to be reliant on these external resources. They're expensive, and the community itself knows the community the best. That's something outsiders can help. Like right now, I can come in and give you advice and things, and strategic advice is maybe great, but that's living here and doing the work every day is different. Anything else?
No, just thanks, and drive home safely, or drive to your saved marriage safely.
Yes. I'll be
Yeah.
picking my husband up at the airport.
And next steps for us as a committee, our next PAC meeting is January 26th. That's the fourth Thursday. That's our standard regular time. And what I'm proposing is, we've seen this presentation. We now have a hard copy of it. We have a soft copy of it that we'll also forward everybody, including Lorelei, who was not able to be here tonight. Take that, the feedback and observe what you heard tonight, and I would recommend that we all go back over this videotape. I find I need to do that with every one of our meetings. And then get out your copy of what we submitted for the communications plan update itself, modified by, our prior to that, the communications and engagement methods that we were recommending, both the PAC report from June 23rd meeting and the detailed report. Take those into account and see what tweaks or changes or additions we might make to perhaps address and clarify some of the issues that Lisa and Stantek have brought forward, most particularly focusing on the paths to collaboration and some of the things she's proposed again tonight. So I would want the individual feedback back by the 13th to me. Close of business the 13th. That's Friday the 13th.
In January.
Yes, in January.
I was going to say.
And I will have all of them out by Monday morning, the 16th, to the rest of us to have 2 weeks to review and bring together and cohesively discuss. I think we can reach agreement. If not, we'll do another brief subcommittee. But we've got a lot of good meat here, and I think we have a good start with the plan we proposed. So does that sound like a path forward?
I have a quick question.
Yes.
For some of the information, do you want it in the form of maybe an appendix to the C&E plan as opposed to modifying the plan itself?
Yeah, use your own best judgment as to where to put that. I mean, we said to the GA when we heard about potentially, we had some different interpretations as to what this meeting was, but we said, and I think I said it in this group, in front of this group, that out of whatever form this meeting was going to take, we may provide additional changes or updates to the plan. And I said that to the GA themselves. So this should not be unanticipated by them. And we're going to take the time to take this feedback, all the valuable information that Stantec has brought us, melded with our own feedback, the public's, and we'll get a recommendation going forward. And with regards to whether the GA takes it or doesn't, I think our track record over the last 2 years is asymptotic with regards to the responses and engagement we are getting from them. And I'm positive about, I think the majority of this is going to be well received, as tempered by budget and a couple other things, as Judy's want to point out.
Well, unfortunately, it takes money to do just about everything, especially when you have a governing board. But I have a suggestion. My suggestion is, as we look at this, perhaps it would be good if each of us provided a summary of what we think the most important action items are, maybe only 5 of them to get the GA going. It's just a suggestion.
Action items for the C&E plan?
You brought up some yourself, workshops.
Well, those are adjustments that we would put into the C&E plan, or we would, they were already in there. Maybe we would amplify and clarify that. So, and that's the kind of input I'm looking for.
So I think maybe, I'm going to, I think, if I can remember to do so, at the end of my suggestions, I'm going to put a short list of what I think should be done first.
Well, I agree. I think we should prioritize it and try to keep it succinct as possible.
Absolutely.
And yet answer the mail, be effective. We had a third party look at what we've written, and some things that we've talked about weren't as clear as maybe we thought they were. And that was helpful. So with that, we'll get to item number 6, member closing comments. John, we'll start with you.
Nothing for me.
See. Renee? None. Camille?
None.
Lyle?
Nothing here either.
Judy?
I wish everybody a happy holiday.
Thank you.
Tim? Oops. Don? Tom?
Nothing. I spoke more this meeting than I usually speak in 3 meetings.
I noticed she's pretty good at drawing you out, huh? Better than I do. Regina?
I'm gonna ruin it, like I normally do. I want to definitely thank Lisa and Emily and everybody who continues to do these meetings while not everybody agrees with them. One thing that I noted after the last one, I think I actually said it to Lisa at the very end of that one. That was one of the only times in the 5 years that I've been kind of tinkering with this that I have seen this community not scream at each other and actually work in a collaborative way, in a healthy way that came up with reasonable ideas, reasonable things. So I appreciate them giving us those opportunities and maybe a little bit of a path forward. And I have a happy holidays to all of you. I'll miss you guys over December. Now your turn.
Yeah. Try to jump in. No. Thank you. I particularly like the structure you gave us to consider, to wrap our remarks around. Thank you.
Yeah, final thanks from the chair and on behalf of the board, all of us, and thanks and drive safely. I do want to say, Don sent me an email tonight on, I didn't have a chance to say this to you before the meeting. I did not recognize an email that came into my box a couple years ago with tasking for the PAC about the review of preferred routes and PAC opinions on that. I will tonight forward that email that I found. And we know, Don, you mentioned potentially a combined PAC and TAC meeting in the next 2 weeks? Do we know if that's happening or not?
There was a Groundwater Authority staff call this afternoon, and it was, Steve Johnson mentioned it, perhaps Tuesday or Wednesday next week, but there was no definite time set, so more information to come, I would imagine.
Do you know anything additional about that, Carol?
Same thing that Don just said. Steve Johnson and his staff are looking to try to schedule that within the next couple of weeks with the consultant who's working on it, and that's Provost and Pritchard.
Okay, so, and this maybe is good because with what I send out tonight, you're going to, if there's a meeting next week, we've got a week to look at it. Essentially, it's reviewing the 3 recommended routes from the last Groundwater Authority meeting, which most of us saw, and doing an assessment of it. They've given you a format to do that. Obviously, the TAC questions are from a different perspective, and responses should be from a different perspective than ours from the PAC. We're primarily looking for things that are obviously policy related, but if you see a glaring technical hole, ask the question. So be prepared for that. Write down, take some notes as you review it. I'll see if they're going to want individual comments in writing before that meeting or not. I do not know right now. Don provided me his. That's how come I knew I was out to lunch on the 16th or 11th of November, apparently. I swear it wasn't in my inbox. It is now.
So were you literally out to lunch, or were you out to lunch?
Well, I may have been out to lunch. I had a medical event recently, and that could explain it. But and finally, remember the deadline for inputs on the other topic. Tonight's topic is the 13th of January. And Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays, and happy whatever religious or other observations that you process or take action on in the winter solstice. That's my last politically correct announcement this year. So with that, we're adjourned, and I'm not going to reach over to pound it. Thank you all for coming.